Adam Cerino Jones, but I live in New Paltz, New York. I'm the rabbi of the Jewish congregation of New Paltz, which is an unaffiliated but Reconstructionist style little town synagogue. We must have met. So Emet repeated Mechina year, the prep year at RRC. So I started his second go around. So we must have met the pre-student stuff, I think. August, September 2017-ish. His hair, I think, was the first thing was it, and he came and his hair, I think, was bright blue at the time. And just it immediately, rolling into the room just immediately there. Immediately, I didn't actually know he was in my year at first because he seemed to know everybody and I didn't know anyone. So, and as it turned out, so we ended up being, yeah, in that same class for that year. So the hair, he also just always dressed very fabulously. So it was just sort of his whole presentation just immediately drew your eye. And how thrilled everyone was to see him. I think also just people genuinely were just really happy to see him at every time they did. So I think those were probably the first impressions. So I visited him at a few times, both when he was at the hospital and then at the hospice later. Candidly, definitely there were people in my cohort who were much closer at that point and really much more involved. Maya and Eli DeWitt and various other folks were much more involved. Sarah Barish, lots of other folks very involved. I do remember one particular instance of visiting him when he was in hospice and when he was starting to decline. As you recall, it took a really long time before things started to really progress. And I that was the first time I had seen him when it was clear he was starting to sort of lose awareness of things. And yet it was an extraordinarily lovely encounter, even though he was having a little trouble placing me at that point, which I had never been a thing, so I sort of attribute that to his dying process. The other one, obviously, is the ordination ceremony in that little hospital room. My sermon, actually, this past Rosh Hashanah was about that experience, among other things, and about Emet as a really the profound experience of my rabbinic education, the most profound. There were more foundational things in terms of learning Talmud and what have you, but in terms of the spiritual, emotional experience, that was quite extraordinary. I was so pleased that Emet got to be there to see it and to know how much he meant to people. What we should all be so lucky if we are dying and that we are surrounded by such love and such care. I found that quite extraordinary. His bravery through all of it and matter of factness about it at such a young age, being so unafraid to die and just knowing that this is just what needed was really quite remarkable. He was a remarkable person. The other one, I guess, the other sort of major memory, and this is outside of the care thing, was when we would do Kadosh 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 in the Amidah. I don't know if you ever saw Emet that he would rear his chair back to you know, to
I didn't
do
know
the
that.
Kadosh, and it's one of my favorite memories of him. And when I say to my congregants now, please rise in body or spirit, I mean it. And it's because of him that he couldn't rise in body, but boy, was he rising in spirit and doing everything he could. And just a remarkable guy. My favorite, I got to drive him to school most weeks for our first year with him and May. We would all ride together. And he was just a joy. Rabbinical school was hard in terms of finding friendships. I don't know that everyone has that experience, but that was certainly mine. And so having someone who was just such an entirely non-judgmental, gentle presence was extraordinarily helpful for me. And I miss him a lot. I think about him quite often. Given that, I know you and others were much closer to him, but even though we weren't very close, I do think about him a lot, even 6 years on, which I guess is why you're doing this project, because so many of us think about him and what he meant to us. Profound, big, like really. I mean, a major blind spot in my rabbinic training, well, not even my rabbinic training, but in my life experience was having disabled folks in my life. Mental illness has been a major part in my story, but in terms of physical disability, he was someone who I learned a lot about how we build community that is actually really inclusive, not just lip service about, well, everyone's welcome, but what is okay? Welcoming is an active thing, though. You can't passively welcome folks. We need to make this feel like home for them. The part that breaks my heart about it, I think, is that Emet didn't get to be rabbi for the many people that would have needed him as a rabbi. And yet, I think, as you correctly identify, his impact on a generation of Reconstructionist rabbis is not going to be lost. I think we all learned a lot from him, even if we didn't know him that well. Some of us did, knew better, and some of us knew less. But in terms of his uncompromising Jewishness and his excitement about being Jewish and his demand to be equally, his Jewishness is just as equal and just as valuable as anyone else's. And for such a tiny little fellow, what a giantly strong, big person he was. For such you wouldn't know the power in that person until you really got to know. But man, was there a lot. I had never heard of EDS until Emet, and now, I swear I hear about people with EDS all the time now, and I don't know if it's more commonly diagnosed, but there's a drag queen on Drag Race who has EDS, and there's a bunch, and I learned so much from Emet in the only year and change I knew him, which is really an amazing thing to influence people so much so quickly. The value of a life. I was saying to a congregant actually yesterday who was diagnosed with ALS, who's, having understandable reactions to that, but the quality of a life is measured not in the number of the years, but how their quality. And Emet lived, man, what a life in such a short time, an extraordinary life. Thank God for him. Really, I think that's. I wish he was here, but thank God for the time we had him. It's true. I think they will, and I know for me definitely, and I think for lots of us in different ways. And he lives, yeah. Emet live, Emet Chai. Emet lives. Maybe we should make a bumper sticker or something. And did outlived all expectations about how his life was going to go. And yeah, I had it around, not around the same time, but one of my dear childhood friends died a few years ago. Similarly, was sick from very early on and was given a very grim prognosis basically from childhood. And he only lived to 32, but what an incredible life it was and how many people he touched. And Emet is very much in that mold. An unforgettable person. I think that's really what it is. And one of our tzaddiks, Rav Chaim, as we called him at that thing, I think that's about right. A rabbi of life is precisely, he didn't get smicha, but that guy knew more about living than most people ever will. What a blessing. Yeah, and always will, I think, very much so. Lador Vador. Yeah, may it be so. Can you hear it, son? It was, and I was really there, I'll say, as a participant more than I was not super involved in the planning of that. I know, I can tell you, I don't know if you've talked to Linda Holtzman yet. It was Linda's baby, I think, among others. While I didn't plan it, I'm not sure if I read anything during it. Is the single most profound Jewish experience I still have ever had. That one. It was so bright and him. It was so unicorns and pinks and purples, and it was all his loved ones and all these rabbis gathered. And it's particularly the moment where they held the talit over him. I don't know if you remember that particular moment as Linda's blessing him and naming him Rav Chaim is I mean, that's the point of Jewish ritual. That sort of stuff is letting him know, as you say, how much he's affected everyone and how much love everyone. We loved him, we adored him, and how his death was not going to change any of that. Was not going to change our love or our learning from him. His teaching, as you say, lives on past his life and past his body. But yeah, so I was not super involved in the planning of that. Well, and it was modeling him. I think really it was very much what I can't recall a time I saw Emet not say something that he felt like he wanted to say. Not in terms of like no filter, but in terms I remember here's an example. When he apparently at some point told May when he was at the hospice, I think, And at least to my knowledge, May is not queer still, but maybe she is now. I haven't spoken with her in a bit, but Emet was like, "You're going to be the most amazing lesbian rabbi," and May was like, "Oh, well, I'm not a lesbian, but I appreciate this." And he goes like, "We'll see." Was sort of the knowing, which I just thought was such a it was just such a funny reaction. But um, I found Emet to be entirely earnest and say exactly tell people he loved them, which is a thing that a lot of, especially Ashkenazim as a group, we're a little buttoned up and not so comfortable sharing our feelings, intimate feelings with people like that. And that was so not him. And so I think that ceremony was very reflective in the layout, in the physical appearance, in the people who were there, but also in the earnestness you're talking about, that it was very much reflective of Emet. His name was so appropriate for the way he was. Truth, right? I mean, entirely him. Truthful and honest and forthright and and also so gentle and sensitive at the same time. Absolutely. And I think that yeah, that ceremony felt very much like that to me. And that he saw you for who you really are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how rare is that a thing for us to really be seen by someone? And I think, almost the brevity of his life is his time was going to be short here. He was such a bright star. Is sort of what it almost that old colloquial, like the brightest star burns out and I think it's very much that way. It was a gift to know him. Truly, he becomes an ancestor,
Yeah.
a beloved ancestor that you will revere for the rest of your life, as will all of us. And I'm very comfort. My sort of personal thing about death is that sort of thing. We become ancestors. We become part of the grand narrative of the Jewish people and of the human race. And he's there with all our ancestors, both real and imagined. And I really know he's just always, maybe not literally looking out over us, but is his presence is always there. And certainly his lessons and his gentleness and his heart live far beyond his life, for sure. The sparks of Emet. I love that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, and I'm excited to see where this project goes. I